you have to ask. Sorry, you have to ask in the state of California, which I'm going to ask you. I'm duty bound to ask if you consent to this recording.
Oh, yes, good, excellent. Yeah.
So no CIA or anyone else listening on this call currently.
Apparently not. Okay.
Yes. So for folks listening in, I'd like to introduce my friend Barney Dicker. I mean, the nature of the YouTube channel is, I can't confirm that there are anyone who, actually I know there are half a dozen people who have explicitly said to me that the video cast is the new format, and I understand why I kind of ended the podcast accordingly. But for folks listening in, or watching in more importantly, what's your introduction with regards to this interesting world of role-playing, miniature wargaming, etc.?
Okay, well, interesting. What is it called these days? If it's not My Rules Are Better, what is it?
Monty's Reviews, which is there's a story behind the channel. So about 15 years ago, I did a podcast with a gentleman. We were going to start calling it Monty and the Fox, obviously about anyway, Second World War reference. And I was classified as Monty, and the other fellow was going to classify himself as the Fox. However, quite controversially, we reviewed a set of rules that contributed, you're going to have to get this straight, let me give it to you, that contributed to the sponsor of the show, who I don't even know gave any money, was a gentleman by the name of Henry Hyde, who's still, anyway. So Henry got sponsorship for his magazine, or had paid ads for his magazine by Osprey. And Osprey brought out a modern rules set for Baghdad specifically, or, what was the turmoil in Baghdad at the time. But it didn't contain any detailed rules associated with the opposition. You could play the American military fine. You could play, the British military or whatever military you choose to play. But it had nothing about the insurgency of any degree of description. Now, obviously, as you know, I'm all about that stuff with regards to what was called Just Plain Chaos, now is returning to the name of Field of Chaos. So I was quite incensed by the fact that there were no rules given for the opposing force. And I did an audio podcast with the other co-host of the show, just outlining what my concerns were with regards to the rule system. That's all I did. And of course, the sponsor then jumps on and says, you've got to clean up that audio. Oh, no, sorry, it wasn't with the guy who actually hosts the podcast. It was another fellow by the name of Neil Shook, who does the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. I'm not sure if you've ever heard that. Anyway, it was Neil Shook who I was interviewing and talked about this particular rule system with. So Henry Hyde, who sponsored the magazine, said that Henry Hyde, whose magazine it was, who got advertising from Osprey, said that we had to remove that audio. Well, you're not going to censor me in a podcast. No way. So I left the podcast. However, I still have the moniker of Monty. So I created a YouTube channel in my frustration called Monty's Reviews, which originally started with dice and a variety of other things. And it was just an all-encompassing thing. Well, when Warhammer The Old World came out, I thought, okay, I can use this channel to actually catalog me playing Warhammer The Old World, or at least, taking one of my many thousands of miniatures in case and putting them together. So I've got maybe 5 armies currently for Warhammer The Old World. And I'm hoping to actually have a battle at my house and actually getting locals involved, including one who participated, Jason Anderson, who participated in the Just Plain Chaos game. You might remember Jason.
Yeah.
He certainly remembers you. So anyway, that's in a nutshell how we ended up with Monty's Reviews.
So I suppose for people who tune into this, hopefully that was instructive as well. For me, I contacted you when you were doing the My Rules Are Better audio podcast yonks ago, and we got chatting, and I got appearing, and that was great for me because I started a podcast about gaming, and we of course have lots of similar interests in all of that. I would say that I'm like a kind of born again board gamer or war gamer or role play gamer, and when you come back with more vengeance, or whatever the term would be. So I've enjoyed getting back into gaming over I would say probably the last 10 years. And I've realized that I just can't stop myself from modifying rules of existing games, and even sometimes I make my own too. But I've not been doing so much of that lately due to just life. Life has kind of, put the brake pedals on a little bit with it. Yes,
I'm doing
you're wearing
this.
your t-shirt. Yeah, I'm not.
Oh, okay.
But I wear them. I wear them. Absolutely.
For
Good that
folks, the
you're.
inside joke is that
Yeah.
I'm wearing the Mammoth Hunters Alluvial Plains t-shirt, which is a rule set that Barney created. We actually, we messed with it a little bit in order to get mammoths involved and mammoth hunts involved. But anyway, sorry, continue.
Well, no, I mean that's that goes back to more active times, which I hope to return to, where I developed a system which works pretty well, and we were developing this Stone Age setting, and because that's very dear to my heart and of course to yours.
Yes,
So we
definitely.
were digging in around that, and yeah, so I've probably created 2 RPG systems, I would say, as mechanical things. And I would say that as a GM, I'm really happy to just start zero prep, basically, just go for it. So I can't give anyone any advice about preparing as a GM because I basically never do.
Interesting.
And if I'm going to tell you about war games, I recently got the latest Warlord Games 2000 AD set, which is ABC Warriors. So if you like that kind of thing, 2000 AD and so on, that's worth a look. They're pretty big. There's some pretty big robots. So I've been having a bit of fun. I'm looking back at my shelf here with some,
Certainly.
I might be able to dig them out in a minute, but and what I've been doing is I've been assembling and priming my minis, and I want to get to a point where I've just got loads of lovely primed minis, and then whenever I feel I can just get that color flowing. I really like the kit bashing and sticking them together, so I'm quite happy staying at that stage in many ways. But I equally I don't want lots of stuff lying around, and it would be so nice to really get them ready for tabletop warfare, like you seem to have done. Yeah, so I mean, Warhammer and Games Workshop has been a big touch point for us, of course, and so. If I ask you about the old world, so they're literally just putting out old stuff again, which means that your stuff, which was so old, outmoded, is now actually the latest, coolest shit, because it's not even the new one, it's the original stuff. Is that
Certainly.
right?
Yeah, no, I have movement trays. The difference between Warhammer the Old World and Warhammer Fantasy Battle is
It's
the size of
movement
the figure.
trays.
Well, no, it's the size of the actual figure squares. So basically, I take 20 millimeters and have to move it up. Well, interestingly enough, 21 millimeters, we'll talk about that in a minute if you want, and move it up to 25 millimeters, or take 25 millimeters and move it up to 30 millimeters. So I have a friend who runs a business. He makes model train dioramas and accessories. Well, he's got a laser. So I just hit him up, pay him a couple of $100, and he sends me the new movement trays. Now, interestingly enough, because I'm having Warhammer the Old World games here, I also have enough miniatures for 40k. However, again, the base size has creeped larger, so I'm going to contact my friend Ron Kleiss at My Map Models and say, okay, I need 100 of these, I need 25 of these, so I can get Orcs versus Space Marines. Just very simply, I've got a bunch of Orcs, I've got a bunch of Space Marines, but they're all on the old base sizes. So you create these little trays, or in the case of Wham in the old world, quite large trays of these particular squares. Now, why I use 21 millimeters and 26 millimeters for the actual drop-ins is because my miniature bases aren't all Games Workshop miniature bases. Because I know.
Heresy.
So when I did a review for a product that aimed to be the same thing, they'd only cut out 25 millimeters, not 26 millimeters, and they wouldn't fit in all the slots. So I have this movement tray that's unusable by me. I may have actually thrown it away. I'm not sure what happened to it. Anyway, my friend Ron Kleiss got me this is 27 millimeters, this is 26 millimeters, this is 25 millimeters. And we found the sweet spot was 26 millimeters. But yeah, because my models are so old, I never considered actually buying GW movement trays. That seemed incredibly expensive compared to the actual miniatures themselves. Anyway, I digress.
Well, I've got a Warlord base. So these are new themselves for the slightly different as the older ones for the ABC Warriors, and it's ever so slightly. I've got a little washer here that should fit. It's ever so slightly a bit bigger as well. So they should be around 25. I don't know what's going on there, but
no, you need a single millimeter of slippage in order just to get the bases in, no matter what.
Well, what I do, you see, because now we've got here's the thing, right? The great thing about your miniatures and other miniatures is they're probably made of metal, which means you've got a bit of weight on the table. You've got skin in the game, you know?
Exactly, yes.
And now, if you've got a resin or a plastic mini, they're almost like, just leaves in the wind. So what
literally.
And there seems to be, with Warlord and others, there's a trend in thinner bases, which are essentially half the thickness of a GW one, and I like those. So what I do is I stick a metal washer on the bottom half of the thing, so it's got a little bit more weight, but it's not too. Well, I realised that might be a happy coincidence. I don't, but it's what I've dreamed of. And if only I'd thought of magnetism when I dreamed of it, it would have been a different dream.
Certainly.
But are you getting into magnets?
No, I only have magnets on. I've got a tank, and I've got a series of like dreadnought-sized minis that have magnets to put it together. When I was working with Rochi Rochwood, shout out to Rochi. We'll talk about him in a minute.
Yeah.
Roch, whose name rhymes with crotch, I think Rochi. Yep, that's perfect. Okay, so anyway, no, I'm not into magnets at all. The only magnetization I have, like I say, is on these walkers and tanks, just to make them interesting to put their arms in various angles, but also have different arms with different weapon systems.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll get a couple of my miniatures now just to show you here. Well, so headphones back on. What's first up? First up is my little modifications that I've done to the squats, which you sent me all those moons ago.
Certainly.
I realized that they don't exactly fit. They didn't fit snugly in the bases, like with the slotter and everything. And then I started looking at them, and I just thought, well, actually, they look much more like they're kind of, getting some kick back from a shot. Some of them, and kind of. So I thought, yeah, I'll put them on one foot. Which might lead me to this. This is a Foundry, Wargames Foundry. So these are the out of print ABC Warriors that they did a while ago.
Interesting.
And this was also going to be both feet on the ground. But again, I kind of thought, the dynamic doesn't quite there.
Yes.
So I thought, actually, I'll put it on one, and the hammer I felt was a bit too small, so I just enlarged it with a bit of green stuff or brown stuff.
Perfect.
give it a bit, so it's got a bit more, oomph to it. So then, because I got that one, which is my favorite of Hammerstein model, I thought, well, what do I do with the Hammerstein model I just got from Warlord, which is the new one? So I thought, well, I'll have a bit of fun. So I chopped the hammer off and put a circular saw on there.
Ooh.
And then I messed with the legs a little bit and put a tiny little pin in the base,
Beautiful.
so that he actually looks a bit like he's jumping.
Certainly.
And yeah, messed around with the legs so that they had a bit more dynamic shape. I just can't resist it. Some of the I think, right, this one's not an important miniature. I'm not going to mess with it. And then I look at it for a bit longer and I think, no, it just irritates me too much. But this one's good fun. This one, so if I compare that with a squat, that's how big it is. This is a robot from Mars Attacks, which Mantic did a while back. So in anticipation of ABC Warriors, I put this together, and I put a big basin, a big metal washer in the bottom of that, because actually it would fall over. But that's just perfect. And so I did exactly like you're talking about with your magnets, but I thought I'll just use glue. So I thought, why make a robot stand like it's in a static position? Or that's my biggest disappointment with a miniature, is when it looks like it's very static, probably to do with the casting, right? And what but just give me some movable arms and I'm away.
Terrific. So in terms of not just your game systems, you had a bunch of games that you'd put money into, you'd interviewed the games developers, this kind of stuff. Are you following on with any of those games?
I mean, I still play in this Call of Cthulhu game, which is recorded. It's an actual play podcast called Grizzly Peaks Radio, and we have a group which has started by going back to the early Games Workshop Cthulhu scenarios, and we're now doing fungi of Yog-Sothoth or something. I don't know. I don't remember. I can't remember. So I still do that, which keeps my head in the gaming a little bit. I still have a youth project going, which needs to get finished. We're on putting the book together now, and that's a gaming project. And I keep up to date a little bit with things, a little bit. I keep my eye on things a little bit. And it's
Electronic Bastion Land, which I find synonymous with you. Have you played any Electronic Bastion Land recently?
Okay, so yes, but I've played a modification of Bastion Land called Cairn. So it uses similar mechanics, and there's another game it uses, I think, which I can't quite remember. So I've been playing that a little bit sometimes. But there's a new Bastion Land, which is Ancient Bastion Land or something. So it goes back earlier in time, and I talked to Spencer, our friend Spencer, about it, and it's interesting because Chris McDowell, the designer of Into the Odd and Electric Bastion Land, it's still his baby, and I was really conscious talking with Spencer about it that there's a lot more rules, and so it's really interesting how you can start off and your aim is to have the most stripped down rules system possible, and you can do a lot with that, and setting wise, mechanics wise, great, fine. But then you want to give it something a bit distinctive, or you want something to work in a way that other games haven't done for you, perhaps. Otherwise, why would you be doing it? Partly. And so going through that, it was, that's what Chris McDowell has done. But it was really interesting to see how with this one, he, in order to kind of bring something new to the table, or to let some mechanics spread into the world. Like now I think there are kind of rules for almost like Pendragon battles and stuff like that, which kind of, the further you get into the rules, then the further away from them being intuitive, they become more idiosyncratic. Would that make sense?
Yeah, most definitely.
I got a nice book the other day made by David Blandy called Eco Mofos, and that's nice. And they've done a good job on that. So I occasionally I see things or I get things, but the old commentator's voice, as I've hung my commentator's voice up for a while. I have, Tom.
Yes. We'd like it to return. I think that's the general consensus. I talk to Spence periodically, and he's like, okay, we've got to get this back together. We've got to get the band back together.
Very good. I am hopeful that I will, but I think but what I'm not doing is right at this moment is starting to give myself targets or deadlines or any of those things beyond any that I have to do. But we're on your video cast. So I see you've got a lovely bookshelf behind you. Is that games behind you, or is this?
So up here, and this my new work. I work for a company called Crunchyroll. It's basically all nerdism all the time at Crunchyroll.
Okay.
They're basically like the Netflix of anime. So all the anime related stuff, manga, all kinds of stuff. It's a fascinating job because I don't know how much I can narrate with regards to my work, but just the level of passion that the fans have with regards to anime. Anyway, so I have up here all my first edition rules. You might be able to see the orange covers.
Yes.
And I have here, sorry, my chair's actually perfectly blocking it, some Warhammer roleplay, 40k role-playing rules. Most of my rule books are over on this side. I normally sit in a different place when I do my podcast, but the Las Vegas dawn kind of creeps up. So I still have a bit of a halo. Can you see the halo?
Yeah, I can see. Yeah,
okay.
I can see.
So anyway, in terms of I've had various people ping me about restarting a Warhammer Fantasy roleplay game, which would be first edition, because actually I'd probably have third edition as well. But yes, so I'm surrounded by my books. It's rather ironic because my father also has a similar shelf layout. My daughters have never been to his house, but he's like, Grandpa has the same shelves that you do. It's being a bibliophile, which is fundamentally part of the problem, having duplicates of everything. So because, once you had the books packed up in the attic, you need another copy of the book for some unknown reason. I ended up with 3 copies of some. I remember I thinned out my Citadel journals and sent you a bunch of them.
Yes. Yeah.
But I still have multiple copies of Citadel journals. So when I went to visit my friend Jason Coffey, who I've known for 17 years now, he once played a battle of orcs. He played orcs of 40k in my presence. So he's a long-standing friend of the Las Vegas area, well, Las Vegas itself. But I live in this little place called Summerlin, which was created by the Howard Hughes Corporation. And life in Summerlin is completely different to my life in San Jose. It's like a complete antithesis. You almost feel like you need to do a Truman Show kind of wave when you get out of the house. Good morning, good morning. Anyway, back to...
Do you fit in?
Barely. I do wear my camouflage regularly.
Yeah, that's good. And have you got your minis in that room as well? Not that I need to see them. I'm just trying to get a sense here.
So under the table is my favorite scale for historical wargaming, 20mm, World War II, a bunch of the tanks. I'm not sure if you've seen 20mm play out.
Uh, well, I mean, it would be a bit like 25 or 30 mil, but just a little bit smaller.
That's what it feels like if you do it precursorily with regards to the figures. What you
Yeah.
need to appreciate is that a tank is proportionate to the figure, but at the same point, easily, I have a, let me, let's see if I can get this out with that. I'm going to knock a bunch. So here's my case for
Yes, I
the
love it. Oh, yes.
20 millimeter. So this can fit Germans, English, and Russian partisans all together. And if I want to play one of half a dozen rules, I can get up my 20 millimeter. It's because the Games Workshop historical rules for the Second World War was for 20 millimeter. At the time, I thought, this is ridiculous. What kind of scale is this thing? But when you actually see them, you actually, in fact, I have on my eBay searches 20 millimeter armies. So I get every couple of days, I get an email from eBay saying, we've got all this 20 millimeter stuff in stock. A little strange. But no, the minis are in the far closet. Did I tell you about my William Salter painting? Wilhelm Salter?
The war painting.
Yes.
I think so. Yes.
Yes. Anyway, so I have my William. I should probably not disclose where I have my valuables, but the William Salter is over with the miniatures as well in the kind of closet of this room.
Okay. And which number house is it? What street? What zip code?
The gate code is the critical thing. The gate code is the critical thing.
And what's that, Tom?
No.
So do you, so back to the old world and war and all of that, Warhammer. Are they going to do the same with 40k then? Is that the no?
I don't think so. I think 40k, they're two completely different groups of players. Warhammer the Old World, I found this with Jason Coffey. Jason wouldn't be a Warhammer the Old World player, aside from the fact that I literally dumped the rule book, bought some of his armies from him. So he and I have a long-standing interaction while I pay for the armies and while he reads the rule book. So that gives him back to my house. Our mutual friend Jason Anderson lives 0.8 miles away from me. We both lived 0.8 miles away from each other when we lived in San Jose. Now in Las Vegas, we are 0.8 miles from each other. And I have another fellow who I used to work with called Don Pitchford, who is about, I don't know, a mile as the crow flies away from me. But he runs a regular D&D night. And I'm like, this guy is right for the fun that is Warhammer Fantasy.
Well, you're in the zone there. I think if that's a good place to be. And I mean, because I haven't kept up with GW at all. Is the old world? Is it basically first edition with tightened up rules, or is it? But the newest rules with the old miniatures.
It's the newest rules with the old miniatures. And what's funny is that players of Warhammer 40,000 will come to the old world and realize there are similar dynamics, particularly around magic and various other things. So my view is that, and I've raised this previously, I will record another video cast with a gentleman who goes by the name of Nurgling, which will happen in a couple of weeks' time. Anyway,
he paints for you sometimes, doesn't he?
No, he doesn't. No, we know each other because we share. Rochi, whose name rhymes with crotch.
That's it.
We share the same miniature painter. Anyway, so I think GW has been incredibly calculated. Obviously, through COVID, they saw community forums associated with Oldhammer just grow and grow and grow. So when you have a forum of maybe 10,000 people on Facebook, but still let's call it a forum because that's basically what it is, you get a sense that there's a huge community out there who have actually saved their models. I represent this community in some regard. And they were looking at basically bringing in a new group that had played the Total War series of games, because obviously they have Total War Warhammer 1, 2, and 3 now. And they have a new group of players who've come in through computer games, not through the actual wargaming hobby.
Oh, okay.
So they knew what they were doing. The rules are sufficiently different that you can't play. Well, you need to at least get movement trays for old armies. But that's what I'm doing. And that gives me 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 even, maybe 5 even old armies.
And I mean, basically, I think this is great. Because, of course, the old rules would have been or are clunky as hell, right? So it's great to take advantage of the streamlining that they're doing. But the thing is, right, and to use old miniatures basically, but that still to me is not far enough. It's a long way for Games Workshop, but it's not far enough in terms of just general practice. Like if I read a Warlord rule book, even for like IP stuff like 2000 AD, they just very nicely say you can use any suitable miniatures, and you're still getting all of the stats and everything for everything. And of course you're going to want to buy the specific miniature to do the specific thing and get the cards that come with it, you know, nice bit of, you know, all of that jazz. But there's still that feeling that you could be using anything, and it doesn't matter if the base is square or 30 millimeter or whatever, or any of those things. And also I just think that you go, I go, which is one of our big discussion points, I just think it's just boring as hell. So I'm assuming that the old world is you go, I go, as always. Like they're not going to change it for that. I mean, which they did. They changed it to I can't even think of the word, but they changed what's the they changed, it's different in Necromunda, isn't it? And
yes,
what's that dungeon, the little dungeon-y type of game with the custom dice, which is quite nice that they've done. So not opposed, what am I talking about? What's the word? Like you do one action after another. God, my brain.
synchronous.
Even it's react. No, it's not reactive. I don't.
Anyway,
it's the opposite of you go, I go, where you move everything. Instead, you move one thing at a time. One, you know, you could move one unit, then you move, the other person moves the other unit, and then it's just so flawed. Because okay, when you're in the middle of the game, fine, it's all good, and you can go to the toilet and have a drink or whatever. But like for the first turn or the first, like the game can be over before you've even really had a go, because the other team just do something and you've lost half of your army or something. And I just think, why do that? Why not have a little increment here and a little increment there, you know? Anyway, so I want Games Workshop to go further. I want them to refine their rules further, and I want them to be more relaxed about people using anything.
I want them to credit their authors. That's the current issue with Games Workshop.
Yeah, okay,
they don't credit their authors. I don't even think they credit their painters or artists, which seems to be very strange in this age of, well, they've had a history. I think you've talked to one of the gentlemen who's left Games Workshop and done his own thing, but they've had a long-standing history of artists and game designers creating a name for themselves, heaven forbid, which means when they leave Games Workshop, Duncan, the painter, you know, when they leave Games Workshop, they actually have a fan base that moves with them. Scary and shocking. So anyway, their solution to that is just eliminate all names.
They also have this podcast, which I haven't listened to for ages. Like it's the official GW podcast. And then they interview the people who work there. So you do get a name and you do find out what people do. So it's a strange, it's a strange thing. I don't know if they're still doing that, but you know, on one level, they're talking quite openly and quite nicely with the people, you know, with the different people involved in GW. And then, like you say, at that other level, it's that company ownership. Company ownership always, you know, like if you've got an underground punk band which is being, you know, bankrolled by a massive record label, that's where you kind of like, So I think that's a shame. It's a shame that they don't do that. So yes, I think that's more important. They should start crediting their hard workers.
Definitely. Well, it also gives you a sense of who's actually writing the rules. I mean, when it was Alessio Captor, you knew he had a particular set of rules. You knew a bunch of the other people had a set of rules. You know their history, and it is ironic that of the Games Workshop, you know, folks that have worked there over the past 30 years, they'll pluck out a Trish. She's not known as Trish Morrison anymore. I can't remember her name, or an Ali Morrison, or any of these people. to actually talk about their
Mm,
rules creation, their experience actually building the rules, which,
mm,
yes, it would be wonderful to see the current authors credited accordingly.
mm, mm, mm. So shall we talk a bit about Just Plain Chaos then, and everything
Certainly,
you want to do
certainly.
about that?
So basically, it was originally called Field of Chaos. It was originally a book that I wrote in 1993, so many, many years ago. Quite ironically, it features my mother in very small portions. My mother's an author, amongst other things,
Mm,
diplomat, all kinds of different things. Well, she decided finally she was actually going to edit the original. Now, the original has a few interesting twists and turns because one of my former friends is in there and claimed that I was stealing his intellectual property to have a character in my book represented by him, which was a very curious thing. So, okay, get rid of his name from the book, um, rewrite it as Just Plain Chaos as opposed to Field of Chaos. Then you have this additional writing. You've got the 1993 writing edited by my mother, or you have Just Plain Chaos, the probably 2019, 2020 kind of time frame. And I thought, you don't need to tell the same story twice. The one from 1993 is in my voice of a 17-year-old in 1993. It's a coming of age story. It's got a variety of bits and pieces in it. So I thought, why have this hostility to my own work based on one individual who has decided at a small period of time in his life to basically just sound off about the situation?
He can't take away your 17-year-old self, Tom.
Exactly.
I can't do it.
So anyway, Field of Chaos Reborn, working with my friend Craig Fraser, who worked on, there's a book called Beyond the Little Blue Box, which is about Craig and my mutual friend John Draper, who actually still lives in Las Vegas. He's known as Captain Crunch in the hacking early days of computing, working at Apple kind of vernacular. Anyway, so Craig and I have worked together for about 30 years, I'm embarrassed to say. So we just trust each other implicitly. Anyway, he's a painter by an artist very similar to our friend David Sermon. Only I don't say only. He makes money in Europe with his paintings and does very well for himself. So doesn't have to. He was based in the US for a period of time. Doesn't have to be based in the US anymore. So he and I basically did Field of Chaos as a project. He put in a bunch of artwork that is his own. And made it into this book, which is, as we speak, probably being put into the print-on-demand offerings. I'm also returning. I might have told you about the comic book around this.
You mentioned the comic book, and I thought, oh, okay, tell me more. Yeah.
So basically, I'm restarting the comic book project through my friend Rochi, whose name rhymes with Crotch, Rochford. He's drawn a couple. It's interesting because he's Irish. So
Rochi rhymes with Crotch, Rochford.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, he's Irish. So when he started doing the drawings, all the characters looked like they were in the IRA, which I thought was mind blown. Like the system is applicable to this thing as well. So anyway, I have this rule system, which originally was 14 pages, keeping it brief, to the point, everything that was necessary, all the fat removed. And then I kind of hemmed it in with a discussion associated with my rules of GMing, which I thought was incredibly pertinent and reflects how had many conversations historically as well. And then I have a little bit at the end. I don't know how it's actually going to fit together because I talk about the MGM shooting here in Las Vegas and how it impacted me associated with the rule system. I might have talked to you about that. I'm not sure.
It rings a bell. Yeah.
So once it was my family members being under fire by some crazed lunatic, it felt just less something that I wanted to play as a role-playing game. And similarly also with the Second World War, literally surrounding me, what aren't rule systems or books, some of them in German, some of them in English, associated with the Second World War. I have a Luftwaffe map thing that was used in the bombing of England. A little booklet of Luftwaffe maps. It smells amazing. If you like old books, this has a bunch of, it smells like leather and some kind of fragrance. And when you open it up, you're just hit by the smell initially. Anyway, so I've got a bunch of these books. I don't know what my daughter's going to do with them because I've got from the Hitler Youth to the Waffen SS, I've got that little pamphlet that was actually used from 1940 that was used to change Hitler Youth into the Waffen SS. I've got all these. I've got plenty of Home Guard stuff from England. I've got a Home Guard directory, which is marked secret on top of it, but obviously they at the stage of giving it away. I have a wonderful collection of these books around that. So I have a
as long as you're not going to get arrested for being the leader of a crypto Nazi cult or anything in Las Vegas, you know.
I think the crypto thing, ironically, the first video cast I did was with a fellow called Gerald de Jong about a month and a half ago. And he basically thinks that crypto is artificial life, which makes sense to me. The idea is the thing that sustains it is something that have humans interact with it.
Mm.
It's very similar to the simulations that I've written or the simulation I've written, because the human interactor actually makes most of the noise to make the simulation interesting. Anyway, I digress. So, comic book project. Getting the rule system out and also getting Field of Chaos out, which will be out hopefully by tomorrow or the next couple of days. All reskinned, edited by my mother of Curious. The book begins with a discussion of church services, which is literally my mother's view of who I was at the time, which is rather curious. Anyway, I'll get you a copy. I have to send you parcels periodically of interesting stuff. Okay. So the aim would be to get the role-playing game out relatively quickly. Comics aren't fast.
No, absolutely. I thought that's so. My immediate thought was, "Whoa, that's another big thing."
Yes, well, the first comic book worked out up until a point.
Oh, you've done you had one already.
I had one already that basically we stopped at about a third of the way through. Okay. She could draw all the characters perfectly, aside from this curious Tom character, who she drew in a variety of different ways. I actually have an AI version of myself on Facebook currently because I'm working for a startup called Meetster, or part-time working in the evenings for a startup called Meetster, and they requested a headshot with me wearing a suit. Well, I don't have anything like that, so the headshot AI generators use about 14 images. They can be Facebook images, and then they generate this interpretation of what you look like, which is very fascinating.
And does it work?
It's I picked out ones where the nose size remained the right size and the shadow on the nose remained the right shadow on the nose. I can't have a flat nose. But yeah, it is very interesting. The head size also kind of wavered a bit like that. So I have a series of them with a smaller head and a series of them with a comically larger head. But yeah, I think the middle ground is actually quite good. And it does things like it cleans up my cleft palate, so I look like, just anyone. And no, it's rather curious. I'll share some of the images with you when we're off this call, because it's quite funny to actually see these things. Are you still in contact with David Sermon?
I am, just about. I mean, in the sense of I don't really have much contact with anybody, but yes, I am in touch with him, and I'm going to see him when I go to London in a couple of weeks or something.
Oh, that's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, so that'll be nice.
Send on my regards.
I will, absolutely.
I do miss our occasional chats.
Yeah.
But, okay. So have I explained? Oh, so anyway.
Yeah.
3 things, maybe even 4 things that are coming out in the near future. One of which is done. The role-playing game is interesting because obviously my friend Craig wants to do a bunch of artwork for it. And Rotti's already submitted this artwork associated with them being very IRA looking, which is quite curious. I mean, you've played the game. You know what the game's about in terms of a near history. But yeah, to see the IRA now presented in this one, I'm like, you could do a role-playing system with the IRA. Anyway, we're getting to the final point. I just got so sick of the Second World War. I was just completely sick of it, and wrote a little epitaph, for want of a better term, at the end of the book, saying, if you were reading this book to get Second World War rules, unfortunately, this is a spoiler for anyone watching this video, but unfortunately, I just can't bring myself to write Second World War rules, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
And do you still plan to have a tabletop skirmish rule for Field of Chaos?
That's exactly right. Yes. Yeah.
So the role play game rules first, and then skirmish.
Well, the skirmish I mean, it's always different when you play with miniatures. I'm sure you can agree with this.
Yeah.
So in terms of WYSIWYG, well, there are actually a bunch of sites, Hero Forge being the largest, that enable you to create your own, near future figures with present day weapons and things like that. So I don't think I add a link to that in the book, but I do discuss that really any miniatures you can use representationally are better than nothing.
But with the sense of having that war game thing of like fight the insurrectionists.
Yes, your arm has been shot, so this is what happens basically.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, good. And will you? So obviously, it's you're in the original thing you're talking about Australia, and then that you're also saying that it's applicable to the IRA. Are you going to have any more kind of acknowledgements of other places it could be applied, or any?
Well, I did it when we played the game. The city that we were walking through, I think, was Hyderabad in India. So you can take maps from other places and just Field of Chaos them up and have different sectors and a variety of different things. The aim is basically to put something, and I do talk quite extensively about house rules. So the aim is just to put something out there that has house rules as if you don't like this, if you don't like, any of the mechanics, have at it. Your rules are better, so to speak. So that is definitely in there. And also I try in the introduction to solicit people contacting me with their rules, because I'd love for a second edition to contain a bunch of house rules for a bunch of different people.
Yeah, it's a difficult tone to strike with house ruling, because if you're writing rules, you want to lay out the construction of the building, right? How everything fits together, and you might have some optional rules here or there. But then if you want to always caveat stuff with like, well, if you don't like this, you could just do it differently, or you want to say that, but at the same time, you don't even want to write it. You want to write it almost as if that's a given. But then how do you?
You have 4 paragraphs explaining why house rules. This was the thing when I met Jackson and Livingston. Even though they sold D&D, they were interested in the house rules that I had associated with D&D, because it's not a perfect thing. It's something that has very rough edges that you're going to have to actually smooth the edges off as a GM or DM. And it's your responsibility to have house rules and just do it accordingly. I mean, what's interesting is the whole interpretational nature of Dungeons and Dragons, that, you now have 15-year-olds who are coming to 5th edition, and they're like, they don't actually understand the idea of house rules, because obviously whatever it is now, Wizards of the Coast are interested in selling you rules, not giving you the ability to have house rules. So explaining why house rules are there, explaining how they make the games more fun, fundamentally. Certainly I have that in the Field of Chaos role-playing game. Frame it very heavily on actually what I think they're not the GM rules, 10 commandments, nothing is set in stone. But the idea that just by having house rules, you're actually probably playing the game better.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting how Wizards of the Coast and Games Workshop have really managed to get the majority of their clientele really, if you like, serious about it doing everything as written. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I've got that wrong, but that kind of you could say geeky thing that we all love, of course, to varying degrees, where this miniature will do what, this character will function differently, or this skill will, and trying to know as much of that off by heart, and in the sense of, but it creates this kind of this sense that maybe there are rules that are fixed.
Certainly.
And that's interesting, and I wonder in what other areas of society where that comes from, where that
the law, the economic system. I mean, as a simulation creator, I frequently remind people that the legal system or the political system is the most curious simulation that we've created as humans, to just see how it plays out.
Yeah. And so some people, I suppose, then are more drawn to following the following the line and other people are just subversives.
Certainly. That's what they've discovered with Warhammer 40,000. I mean, they've realized that it's a huge competition draw, as potentially Warhammer the Old World is. But they also appreciate that it's played for a very specific purpose. If you see what I will call an American game of Warhammer 40,000, which is how I know my friend Jason Coffey, because I saw him actually play Warhammer, and it was rather a curious thing because he was very competitive in that line. We haven't actually played a game since. I wonder what he's like now, whether age has given him wisdom associated with that. But at the time, it was very curious because certainly in contrast to the English, I don't know what you call it, wargaming style, this was very much a kind of hyper-American wargaming style. But Barney, I have to unfortunately round up this recording. I want to have you back. But unfortunately, I have another recording on the hour that's coming up, another English academic that I'm talking with. So this has been an absolute pleasure. We've got to do this thing again. I'll get you the link once the video's online, and you can move it through your particular circles, and I will move it through my particular circles.
Absolutely, Tom. Thanks for having me back on in this new visual world of video podcasting.
Believe me, it's the pleasure is all mine, Barney.
Good luck with everything. Good luck with it all.
Thank you. So I've turned the recorder off.